The Indian invasion of Alexander began in the spring of 327 BC, and after a year campaigning in India, Alexander found himself standing on the eastern shore of the Beas River. In his mind, this was the end of the first stage of his Indian campaign, and crossing the Beas River would mark the start of the final stage of this campaign, which would eventually result in the conquest of whole India. But destiny had other plans. On the eastern bank of the Beas River, his troops mutinied and refused to cross the river and move eastwards. Now, here the most important question for us is, what was the reason behind this mutiny? Why Alexander's troop did not want to go further east, and finally, why Alexander returned. If we start with the mutiny itself, our sources tell us that Alexander's troops were exhausted by the constant battles, and seeing that Alexander's desire for new victories is not coming to an end anytime soon, these exhausted troops finally mutinied. Now, at one level, exhaustion as the reason for the mutiny may seem reasonable to us. But this also raises an obvious question. Why did the mutiny happen on the bank of the Beas River? Why it did not happen on the bank of Ravi or Jhelum? Thus, there has to be some other reason behind Alexander's return. We cannot say that the mutiny alone was the reason behind Alexander not crossing the Beas River. And when we analyze different sources, it is quite apparent that the mutiny was the outcome of various circumstances. And it is these prevailing circumstances that compelled Alexander to return. Now, when we look at the circumstances, the most obvious is the Battle of the Jhelum itself. Although the Battle of Jhelum does not find any mention in Indian sources, but in Western sources it is one of the most important battle that Alexander fought. And for Alexander, Porus was a formidable foe. The victory Alexander achieved over Porus was not as easy as it may seem to us. Even in Western sources, we can see that there is a realization of how difficult it was for the Greek forces to overcome Porus. Plutarch, when describing the result of the battle, writes, "The battle with Porus depressed the spirits of the Macedonians and made them very unwilling to advance farther into India. For as it was with utmost difficulty they had beaten him when the army he led amounted only to 20,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry." Even after this victory over Porus, it was not like there were no further resistance for the Greeks. In fact, it would not be wrong for us to say that for the Macedonians, their challenges increased after this battle. This is best seen in the siege of Sangala. Sangala was the capital of the Scythians. Scythians, according to the Greek sources, inhabited the region between Ravi and Beas. When Alexander crossed the Ravi river and moved towards Sangala, we are told that the Scythians gathered to protect their capital. What followed was a bloody siege. Although in the end Alexander's forces emerged victorious, but the victory was achieved at a great cost. The Western sources tell us that in the siege of Sangala, 1,200 Macedonians got wounded. This is a unique admission on the part of Western sources, and this high number of wounded soldiers show that how desperate this fight had been. We should also remember that these battles, whether we are talking about the Battle of Jhelum or the siege of Sangala, were taking place during the monsoon season. The Macedonians were not used to the monsoon rains. The swollen rivers that were a characteristic of this season were difficult to cross for the Macedonian army, and campaigning in the rainy season was a nightmare. While marching through the Indian countryside, Alexander's troops encountered poisonous snakes. These poisonous snakes they had never seen. How dangerous these reptiles were for the Macedonians can be seen from the fact that the Western sources tell us that the Greek soldiers took to sleeping in hammocks to avoid these venomous snakes. All of these factors made the Macedonians wary in this Indian campaign. But in my view, the primary factor behind this mutiny was what lay east of Beas. Although our sources are not entirely clear whether Alexander and his troops knew about the Nanda Empire that lay in the east, but what is clear is that they were aware of the military might of the power that lay in the east. If we look at sources like Diodorus, Curtius, or Plutarch, they talk about the Nanda Empire and the army that it had. If we look at these sources, they provide different figures of the Nanda army. And if Alexander's troops also knew about this figure, then it means that this army was different from any army which they encountered up till now in this Indian campaign. If we look at Arrian, who does not talk about the Nanda Empire, but even in this source we can say that he was aware of the military might of the people that resided east of Beas. Talking about the military might, Arrian writes, and I quote, "It was also reported that the people there had a great number of elephants than the other Indians, and that those were of superior size and courage." It was these elephants that were a great cause of worry for the Macedonians. Even in the Battle of Jhelum, elephants were a major cause of concern for Alexander. In this battle, Porus had fielded around 200 elephants. These 200 elephants left a deep impression on the Macedonian troops. William Woodthorpe Tarn, while describing the impact of these elephants, writes, "But against the 200 elephants of Porus, he, Alexander, had no choice. All he could do was to put some of his best infantry in line and leave it to them. They did defeat the elephants, but it was evidently a fearful struggle. The men were never quite the same again." Now, considering that an army of 200 did this to the Macedonians, then what an army with thousands of elephants could do. In sources where the size of the Nanda army is mentioned, we find that the elephant corps of the Nandas ranges from 3,000 elephants to 6,000 elephants. Even Arrian, who does not provide us any such figure, mentions that the people east of the Beas had great elephants with superior size and courage. Thus, it should not come as a surprise why Alexander's troops did not want to cross the river, as they knew what was waiting for them on the other side. So these were the multiple factors that were responsible for the mutiny that happened in the summer of 326 BC. Alexander, who may have had doubts about this venture of going further eastwards, when he saw that his troops are refusing to cross the Beas River, he finally relented and began his return to the west. Now watch this playlist to know more about Alexander's campaign of India. If you like this channel, do subscribe. Thank you for watching.